cantina's air recyclers hummed quietly, mixing the sense of 100 different worlds into something that barely qualified as breathable. Station Nexus never slept, and neither did its watering holes. Traders, mercenaries, and deep space haulers filled the cramped space, their conversations creating a constant buzz in dozens of languages. Commander Vextel sat hunched over his drink. At table 47, the same table he'd claimed every night for the past 3 months, the amber liquid in his glass wasn't getting him drunk anymore, but it helped dull the memories that clawed at his mind like living things. His 6 compound eyes tracked the movement of other patrons without really seeing them, a habit left over from too many years of watching for threats. The old Caltharian's exoskeleton told the story of his military career better than any metal. Deep gouges ran along his left arm where Zalthari plasma bolts had nearly taken the limb off. A spiderweb of cracks spread across his chest plate from when a Vorthok breacher had exploded too close. His right mandible was shorter than the left, courtesy of hand-to-hand combat on Europa Station. The service ribbons on his worn uniform jacket caught the cantina's flickering neon lights. Sector Defense Medal, Coalition Victory Star, the silver cluster that marked him as a combat veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns. But it was the small black ribbon tucked between the others that drew the most attention from those who knew what it meant. The Terran Operations Medal, the one they gave to non-human soldiers who had served alongside human military units. Very few aliens wore that particular ribbon and lived to talk about it. A group of young cadets from the Naval Academy on Centauri. Prime had been watching him for the better part of an hour. They whispered among themselves, pointing at his medals and arguing about something in hushed tones. Finally, the Thraxian among them worked up the courage to approach. The kid couldn't be more than 20 standard years old, his blue-scaled skin still bright with youth and optimism. "Commander Vextel," the cadet's voice cracked slightly. "We heard you served in the Great Coalition War. We're studying it at the Academy, but our instructors won't talk about certain battles. The classified ones." Vextel's mandibles clicked together in what humans would recognize as nervous laughter. His 6 eyes focused on the group of youngsters for the first time all evening. Thraxian, 2 Centauri twins, something that looked like a walking tree from the outer colonies, and a short, stocky being that might have been from the mining worlds near Vega. "War stories, is it?" Its voice carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. "You want to hear about the glory of battle? It's the honor of serving the Coalition?" The cadets nodded eagerly, pulling chairs closer to his table. The tree creatures' translator device flickered as it processed languages. "Then you've come to the wrong veteran, younglings." Vextel drained his glass and signaled the bartender for another. "I won't tell you about heroic charges or brilliant strategies. I won't. Fill your heads with dreams of medals and promotions." He leaned forward, his scarred exoskeleton creaking with the movement. The cadets found themselves drawn in despite the darkness in his tone. "I'm going to tell you about the humans I served with, about why their names still wake me screaming. 15 cycles after the war ended. It's about why every alien species in the galaxy whispers their stories in the dark and prays they never have to face them in battle." The Thraxian cadet swallowed hard. "The humans were our allies, sir. They fought beside us. They fought beside us." Vextel's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like dark mirrors, and that's exactly why I have nightmares. It paused as the bartender, a 6-armed Altarian, brought his drink. The creature's tentacles trembled slightly as it set the glass down. Vextel realized his reputation had spread even to the service staff. "Their names were simple," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Human names? Always are." Ginwu was a sergeant in the 47th Assault Battalion. 19 years old and built like a reactor housing, Heonki commanded a scout unit, quiet as space itself, until the shooting started. Sora ran medical evac, pulled wounded soldiers out of fire zones that would melt tungsten steel, and Tay-Min... Vextel's voice trailed off, and one of his claws involuntarily scraped against the table's surface, leaving deep gouges in the metal. Taman was a demolitions expert, had a smile that could light up a command center and hands steady enough to defuse a fusion bomb. While enemy fire was raining down around him, the cadets waited in silence, sensing something terrible was coming. They were good soldiers, professional, efficient, Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of deep agitation among his species. But what they could do when cornered, when their backs were against the wall and their people were threatened, what they were capable of. Took a long drink, his 6 eyes staring at something only he could see. That's when you learned the truth about humans. That's when you discovered why every species in the galaxy fears them, even the ones that call them allies. Vextel's claws drummed against the table as the memories flooded back. The cantina around them seemed to fade away, replaced by the cold vacuum of space and the burning hull of Kepler Station. Kepler Station wasn't supposed to be important, he began, his voice taking on the hollow tone of someone reliving a nightmare. Just a refueling depot on the edge of Zalthari space. But it sat right on the hyperspace lane between their core worlds and the front lines. Cut off that route, and their entire war machine would grind to a halt. The Thraxian cadet leaned forward. So the Coalition decided to take it? Take it. Vextel's mandibles clicked in bitter amusement. Child, we were supposed to destroy it. Quick strike, plant some fusion charges, get out before their fleet arrived. Should have taken 6 hours. He paused to take another drink, his 6 eyes growing, distant. Instead, we walked into the biggest trap the Zalthari had ever set. 3 full battle fleets waiting in the asteroid field around the station. Our ships were cut to pieces before we even knew what hit us. Those of us who made it to the station's surface were trapped like insects in amber. The mining world cadet shifted nervously. How many survivors? 800 Coalition forces, mixed species task force, Caltharians like me, Centauri shock troops, Altarian engineers, and 47 humans from the Terran 3rd Marines. Vextel's voice dropped. By the end of the first week, we were down to 600. By the end of the first month, 400. The Zalthari didn't need to assault us. They just had to wait. The station's recycled air seemed to grow thicker. As Vextel continued his tale, their plasma batteries were positioned in the asteroid field around us. Every time a supply ship tried to break through, they'd light it up like a festival firework. The station's shields were failing, life support was running on backup power, and our commanders were preparing surrender terms. That's when Lieutenant Donghan requested a meeting with Coalition Command. I'll never forget that briefing. The humans stood there, calm as deep space, while our generals talked about preserving lives and honorable defeat. When they finished, he just looked at them and said, "With respect, sirs, humans don't surrender." One of the Centauri twins spoke up. What did he propose? Tactical reconnaissance, he called it. Said we needed accurate intelligence on enemy positions before any assault could succeed. The Caltharian general asked him how he planned to get close enough to their gun emplacements for detailed scans. Vextel's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like dark water. Donghaeon's answer was simple. We're going to walk up to them and take measurements. The young cadets exchanged confused glances. The tree creature's translator device, word as it processed the implications. I thought he was joking, Vextel continued. Even humans couldn't be that insane. But the next morning, I watched Sergeant Minho and his fire team gear up for what they called a reconnaissance patrol. Standard combat armor, basic weapons, and sensor packages that could record everything from plasma cannon firing rates to shield generator frequencies. They knew it was suicide? Oh, they knew. Vextel's voice cracked slightly. Minho came to find me before they left. Asked me to look after a picture of his family if he didn't make it back.
Ow.
His daughter was starting school on Earth. He wanted to see her first day. Cantina had grown quieter around them. Other patrons unconsciously drawn to the old commander's words. I watched through the station's external cameras as they moved across the asteroid's surface. The Zalthari let them get within 200 meters of the first gun emplacement before opening fire. Minho's team scattered, using the rocky terrain for cover, but there wasn't much protection from plasma cannons designed to crack starship hulls. Vextel paused, his claws scraping deep gouges in the table's metal surface. Private Jung-Soo took a direct hit 30 seconds into the firefight. Instead of falling back, he kept crawling forward, his suit sensors recording the exact position and firing pattern of the cannon that killed him. Sergeant Minho made it. Within 50 meters before plasma fire took out his legs, He dragged himself another 20 meters, transmitting data until his suit's power died. The Thraxian cadet's scales had turned pale blue. They were using themselves as living probes. Every human who died sent back data: weapons positions, shield frequencies, patrol routes, ammunition storage locations. By the time the first reconnaissance team was wiped out, Dong Haiyan knew more about Zalthari defensive positions than their own commanders did. And then he sent out another team. 5 more teams over the next 3 days. 47 humans went out on those missions. 12 came back. Vextel's voice was barely above a whisper now, but they mapped every gun emplacement, every shield generator, every weak point in the Zalthari defenses. The old commander's 6 eyes focused on something beyond the cantina's walls, seeing ghosts from 15 years ago. Corporal Yunji was on the last mission. Plasma fire took both her legs off at the knees, but her suit sealed the wounds automatically. Instead of calling for evacuation, she started crawling. 2 kilometers across broken rock and twisted metal, dragging herself toward the main shield generator while transmitting structural analysis data. Did she make it? She made it. Spent 6 hours recording every detail of that installation before her suit's power finally died. When we found her body 3 days later, she was still clutching the data recorder. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of sacrifice. The assault began on day 9-4. Dong Haiyan had turned 47 Marines into the most detailed intelligence network the galaxy had ever seen. We hit 12 critical targets simultaneously, using the exact frequencies and attack vectors his people had died to discover. Vextal drained his glass in one long swallow. The siege that had lasted 3 months was over in 4 hours. The Zalthari never knew what hit them. Their impregnable fortress fell like a house of cards because humans had been willing to use their own lives as currency to buy victory. The mining world cadet's voice was small. 60% casualties? 28 humans died in those reconnaissance missions. 19 more in the final assault. Out of 47 Marines, only 12 survived to see the station secured. Vextel's mandibles clicked slowly. When I asked Dong Haiyan about the losses, he looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. Acceptable casualties for mission success, he said. Like it was the most natural thing in the galaxy. The old commander stood slowly, his scarred exoskeleton creaking. That's when I started having the nightmares. Not about the Zalthari, or the battle, or even watching friends die. About the look in Dong Haiyan's eyes when he called 28 lives acceptable losses. About how easily humans could turn themselves into ammunition, if that's what victory required. Vextel's 6 eyes went completely black as he stared into his empty glass. The cantina's ambient noise seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of recycling air and distant engine hums. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tremor that made the young cadets lean back instinctively. Proxima B was supposed to be paradise, he began, his claws clicking nervously against the table. Terraformed world, perfect atmosphere, crystal, blue oceans. The humans had built their first major colony outside the Sol system there. 2 million settlers, including families who'd traveled for generations just to walk on real soil under an open sky. The Thraxian cadet's scales shifted to a worried purple. What happened to it? The Zalthari happened. Its mandibles ground together. They'd been losing ground for months after Kepler Station fell. Desperate times call for desperate measures, as humans say, so they decided to send a message that would break coalition morale once and for all. He signaled for another drink, his hands shaking slightly. The 6-armed bartender brought it quickly, clearly recognizing the signs of a veteran. Lost in dark memories. I was aboard the heavy cruiser Valdris when we received the distress signal. Colony Administrator Kim Su's voice was barely a whisper through the static. Biological attack in progress. Atmospheric processors compromised. Population centers under chemical bombardment. Request immediate evacuation. Then the transmission cut to static. The mining world cadet shifted uncomfortably. Biological weapons were banned by the Geneva Conventions. Tell that to the Zalthari. Vextal took a long drink.
Ow. By the time
we reached orbit, their attack fleet was already jumping away. They'd dumped their payload and run like the cowards they were. But the damage was done. The old commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the cadets to strain to hear him. The orbital scans showed green clouds spreading across the surface like infection. The Zalthari had weaponized some kind of engineered spores that fed on organic matter. Trees, crops, grass, anything living. The stuff didn't just kill, it dissolved everything it touched into chemical soup. One of the Centauri twins made a disgusted sound. The colonists, trapped in emergency shelters that were never designed for long-term siege. The spores were eating through the air filtration systems. Every breath was poison. Every surface they touched burned their skin. Vextel's S-exoskeleton trembled. Command ran the numbers. Even with perfect conditions, we could maybe evacuate 10% of the population before the shelters failed completely. The tree creature's translator device worked urgently as it processed the implications. Admiral Vekfar made the call that any rational military commander would make. Mark the planet as a loss, establish a quarantine zone, and warn other colonies about the new Zalthari weapon. 2 million people written off as acceptable casualties in the greater war effort. But the humans disagreed. Captain Byung-ho was commanding the Terran Marines attached to our battle group. 53 soldiers total. When he heard the evacuation was being called off, he requested an immediate meeting with the admiral. Vextal paused, his compound eyes focusing on the cadets. With an intensity that made them uncomfortable, was in that briefing room. Watched Byung-ho stand at attention while Vekvar explained why a rescue mission was impossible. The chemical clouds would eat through environmental suits in minutes. Landing craft couldn't operate in that atmosphere. Even if they could reach the surface, there was no way to evacuate 2 million people before the toxins overwhelmed their life support. What did the human captain say? Nothing at first. He just stood there, perfectly still, while the admiral laid out all the logical, rational reasons why his people had to die. Then he asked one question. How many of those colonists are children, sir? The cantina around them had grown noticeably quieter, other patrons unconsciously listening to the old warrior's tale. The Ifar checked his datapad. Approximately 400,000 miners, Captain? Understand this is difficult, but we cannot risk more lives on an impossible mission. That's when Bungho's expression changed. I'd seen that look before, at Kepler Station. It was cold as deep space, but with something burning behind his eyes. Vextel's voice cracked slightly. With respect, Admiral, humans don't abandon children. My Marines are volunteering for surface operations. We'll extract as many civilians as possible before the shelters fail. The Admiral tried to talk him out of it. For 20 minutes, showed him atmospheric analysis, casualty projections, equipment failure rates. The math was simple. Anyone who went down to that surface was going to die probably within hours. But Byung-ho just kept saying the same thing. There are people, sir. We don't leave our people behind. The old commander took another drink, his claws leaving fresh scratches in the table's surface. 3 hours later, I watched 53 human Marines load into drop pods designed for quick insertion missions. They'd modified their environmental suits with extra armor plating and redundant life support systems. But everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. The chemical fog was too corrosive, too aggressive. You tried to stop them? I begged Byung-ho to reconsider, showed him the atmospheric readings myself. Those spores would eat through tungsten steel, given enough time. Even their best equipment would fail in minutes. He looked at me with those cold human eyes and said, then we better work. Fast! Vextel's voice grew distant as he relived the horror. I monitored their descent from the bridge. 53 drop pods burning through that green hell like falling stars. Specialist Ru Young's pod landed in the heaviest concentration of spores. We watched her suit integrity drop from 90% to 60% in the first 30 seconds. The Thraxian cadet's scales had turned almost white. She turned back. She kept running toward the nearest shelter complex. Her suit's alarms were screaming warnings about chemical exposure, but she ignored them. By the time she reached the colonists, the spores had eaten through her outer armor completely. The emergency medical systems in her suit were injecting her with pain suppressors and anti-shock. Drugs just to keep her conscious. But she saved them. She saved them. Loaded 43 civilians into an emergency transport and flew them to the extraction point while her skin was literally dissolving. Died 3 minutes after the transport lifted off. But those 43 people made it to orbit alive. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of sacrifice. Sergeant Kite's helmet cracked during his drop. The toxic fog poured in, immediately burning his eyes and throat. Should have killed him in seconds. Instead, he sealed the crack with emergency foam and kept going, navigating by sound and his suit's proximity sensors. Vextel's mandibles clicked rapidly. I listened to his cum channel as he moved through the colony. He was talking to the children he was rescuing, telling them stories to keep them calm, while the chemicals ate through his respiratory system. His voice got weaker and weaker, but he never stopped talking, never let them hear how much pain he was in. Private Sangman found a shelter with 200 colonists trapped inside. The spores had compromised their air filtration completely. They had maybe an hour before the toxins killed them all. But the shelter's blast doors were jammed shut, and the chemical fog was too thick for his cutting tools to work properly. The old commander's voice broke completely. So he used his bare hands, tore the doors apart with his fingers, while the spores ate through his gloves, his arms, his face. By the time he got those people out, you couldn't recognize him as human anymore. But he kept working, kept carrying children to safety, even after he'd lost most of his face to acid burns. How many did they save? 4,312 civilians made it to orbit alive. Pregnant mothers, elderly couples, children who'd never seen any world but Proxima be all because 53 humans decided that no one gets. Left behind, Vextel drained his glass and set it down with shaking claws. 12 Marines survived long enough to reach the extraction ships. Most of them died in medical bay within hours. Captain Bunho lasted long enough to submit his mission. Report. His final words were logged in the ship's computer. Rescue operations complete. All available civilians evacuated. Requesting assignment to next mission, the young cadets sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd heard. That's when I realized the truth about humans, Vextel whispered. They don't calculate acceptable losses when their own people are threatened. They don't weigh costs against benefits. They just ask one question. How do we save them all? And then they die trying to find an answer. The cantina's lights dimmed slightly as the station's power cycled through its evening. Routine. Vextel's compound eyes reflected the changing illumination like dark mirrors. Each one focused on a different memory that refused to fade. The young cadets waited in silence, sensing that something even darker was coming. You want to understand. What makes humans truly terrifying? Vextel's voice carried a weight that made nearby conversations stop. It's not their courage in battle or their willingness to die for strangers. It's their memory. Humans remember everything, and they never let go. The Thraxian cadet shifted nervously. All species remember their wars, Commander. No, youngster. We remember battles, campaigns, strategic victories. Humans remember faces. They remember names. They remember every single person who wronged them, and they pass those memories down through generations like sacred texts. Vextel gestured to the bartender for another round. His movements slower now, weighed down by the stories he was telling. Research Station Omega-7 was a small facility in the outer colonies. Nothing strategic about it. It's just 300 human scientists studying alien plant life, trying to develop better food sources for colony worlds. They had their families with them, wives, husbands, children. It was supposed to be safe, far from the front lines. The mining world cadet leaned forward. What happened to it? Warlord Kethmore happened. He was running raids behind coalition lines, hitting supply convoys and communication relays. Quick strikes, maximum damage, minimal risk. But his fuel cells were running low, and Omega-7 had a refueling station. Vextel's mandibles clicked in a pattern that other Caltharians recognized as deep distress. The station offered no resistance. They weren't even armed. It's just scientists and their families trying to make the galaxy a better place. Kethmore could have taken what he needed and left them alone. Instead, he decided to send a message to human colonies everywhere. The old commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. He ordered his troops to execute everyone: scientists, technicians, security personnel. 87 children between the ages of 6 months and 16 years. Shot them in the station's main corridor and left their bodies floating in zero gravity as a warning to anyone who might think about resisting the Zalthari. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of the station's engines.
Lieutenant Colonel Jason
Was part of the investigation team that found the station 3 days later. I watched the footage from his helmet camera. Bodies everywhere, small ones mixed with the adults. The Zalthari had made it look like a slaughterhouse. Fextel paused, his 6 eyes focusing on something beyond the cantina walls. Most of us filed our reports and moved on to the next mission. War is full of atrocities, and you learn to compartmentalize, or you go insane. But not Jason. I found him in the station's computer core 6 hours after the initial sweep, downloading every piece of data he could find. What was he looking for? Everything. Security footage, communication logs, personnel files. Memorized the face of every person who died in that station. Learned their names, their backgrounds, their hopes and dreams. The 6-year-old girl who wanted to be a pilot. The elderly botanist who was 3 weeks from retirement. The young couple who'd just gotten married and were expecting their first child. The tree creature's translator device Word as it processed the emotional weight of the story. When I asked him what he was doing, he looked at me with those cold, human eyes and said, "I'm making sure they're not forgotten." Then he requested a transfer to Intelligence Division. Said he had a special project that needed his attention. Bextel took a long drink before continuing. That was the last time I saw Jae-sung during the war. But I heard stories. Reports from deep space reconnaissance missions intercepted Zalthari. Communications, intelligence briefings that mentioned a ghost hunting their commanders. He was tracking Kethmore? Oh, he was doing more than tracking. Jae-sung spent 3 years learning everything there was to know about the Zalthari military structure. He studied their language until he could speak it better than natives. Their customs, their religion, their family hierarchies. Then he disappeared completely. The Centauri twins exchanged worried glances. Disappeared? Military records show him as killed in action during a reconnaissance mission in the Vega sector. But that was just paperwork. The real Jae-sung was already deep in Zalthari space, wearing their uniform, speaking their language, becoming one of them. Vextel's compound eyes reflected the cantina's lights like fragments of broken glass. For 15 years, I thought he was dead. The war ended, peace treaties were signed, and life went on. Kethmore had been promoted to sector commander and was considered a war hero by his people. Most of the galaxy had forgotten about Research Station Omega-7, but Jae-sung hadn't forgotten. Humans never forget. The old commander's voice carried absolute certainty. I learned that 8 years after the war ended, I was working as a security consultant on a trading station when I got a message on a secured channel, just coordinates and a timestamp. No signature, but somehow I knew who it was from. You went to meet him? The coordinates led to a bar on the edge of Zalthari space. Rough place, full of smugglers and mercenaries. I almost didn't recognize him at first. 23 years had turned Jae-sung into an old man. Gray hair, weathered skin, scars that told stories of battles I'd never heard about. Fextel's voice grew distant with memory. But his eyes were exactly the same, cold as deep space, burning with a fire that time couldn't touch. He bought me a drink and told me he had something to show me. They never used any of these weapons, never even threatened to use them. But they developed them anyway, just in case. Because for humans, winning a war isn't enough. They need to know that they can win every possible future war as well. Move toward the cantina's exit, his movements slow and deliberate. Other patrons cleared a path for him, their various alien features reflecting a new understanding of the galaxy's most dangerous species. I've seen civilizations that could shatter. Stars surrender entire sectors to human expansion fleets, rather than risk open conflict. I've watched species with technology that makes our weapons look like stone knives flee to the galactic rim when they learned humans were colonizing nearby systems. He paused at the cantina's entrance, turning back to address the young cadets. One final time. You want to know what makes humans truly terrifying? It's not their weapons, or their tactics, or even their willingness to die for their cause. It's their absolute certainty that they will survive and prosper no matter what the cost. They approach every conflict with the assumption that they will eventually win, and they prepare accordingly. The mining world cadet found his voice. But there's still just one species among thousands. Surely the galaxy is big enough for everyone. Vextel's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. Child, humans don't think in terms of sharing the galaxy. They think in terms of securing it. Every world they colonize becomes a fortress. Every trade route becomes a strategic advantage. Every alliance becomes a tool for future expansion. They're not trying to conquer the galaxy. They don't need to conquer it. They're already transforming it, one system at a time, into something that serves their long-term survival interests. In 100 years, maybe 200, every major trade route will pass through human space. Every strategic resource will be controlled by human corporations. Every military alliance will have human observers, the old commander's voice carried. The weight of prophecy. And it will all be perfectly legal, perfectly voluntary, perfectly peaceful. Because humans understand that the best way to win a war is to make your enemies believe they chose to lose. As Vextel stepped through the cantina's entrance, his final words echoed in the sudden silence. Remember what I've told you, youngsters. Humans are patient. They're thorough. They never forget, and they never give up. Most importantly, they're already 3 moves ahead of whatever game you think you're playing. The entrance sealed behind him with a soft hiss, leaving the cadets alone with their thoughts and the growing realization that everything they thought they knew about the galaxy's balance of power was wrong. Through the cantina's viewports, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed less like distant suns and more like the eyes of sleeping giants, waiting with infinite patience for their time to shine. In the depths of space, human ships moved between worlds with quiet efficiency, their crews unaware that an old alien warrior had just revealed their species' most terrifying secret to a new generation of potential enemies. The galaxy turned on its axis. Vast and ancient and full of wonders, but somewhere in the darkness, between stars, humanity was already writing the next chapter of its history, and that chapter would be written in whatever language served their purposes best, the end.